In today's session, I want to show you an example of how to combine contrasting tangle patterns. Those are patterns that have a completely different structure from one another, and yet we want to bring them together in a way that still remains pleasing to the eye to look at or interesting to look at. So in today's example of a non-representational Zentangle drawing, we're going to combine one pattern that is made up entirely of orbs and curved lines and circles, and the other pattern has its structure completely in a grid-based, square or line-based pattern. So completely the opposite of one another. Now we're not going to do anything spectacular with them. We want to keep it simple and approachable, but hopefully you'll find this to be a fun and interesting tile. Let's jump in. Our preparation for this tangle pattern and this composition is very simple. We want to take our pencil and starting down here or somewhere in the lower right quadrant, we just want to make kind of a wonky line that we can follow around here. Not really a frame per se, but just something to give us a guide as we go about our next tangle. So what we're going to do, this first tangle is called Quipple. Now if you are familiar with Zentangle at all, you more than likely have already heard about Tipple, which is simply what is called these orb-based shapes. But Quipple combines these orbs in a specific way. We're going to start by making a circle, if you will, or this wonky shape all around our tile with larger shaped orbs. And they don't have to be perfectly round. In fact, let me just comment on that. In Zentangle, this is called an orb precisely to help people avoid that sense of obligation to have a perfectly formed circle. An orb just lets us know it's a rounded shape, but it may not be perfectly circular. They might have an ovalness to them or some sort of generally wonky shape like I just did there. And we just want to be aware of that so that we can have a little more freedom with what it is we're drawing. I'm just working my way around this shape that we drew with our pencil to create a kind of a variety of interesting movement here. But we're also framing things up for our next tangle when we begin it here shortly. Now this one, I'm just making all of these orbs just touch each other. I'm not worried about overlapping or drawing behind or anything like that. Just getting a row or a ring of these shapes down so that we can begin the next part of this tangle, which, as I said, is called Quipple. So Tipple, just orbs. Quipple is going to involve primarily orbs, but some additional elements. Now this second step, we want to do a bunch of smaller orbs nestled right in along this same line. Now we can go a layer or two deep, but we want to again keep these roughly consistent in their size. In this kind of tangle, when we're doing the same thing over and over again for a larger area, it really gives us that opportunity to get some Zen flow going or to just focus our thoughts away from the cares of the day and just enjoy what we're doing. Get lost in just creating these lines. You can follow along at your own pace, of course, and if you want to turn this into a meditative process for yourself to really relax, don't feel rushed. Just pause the video and carry on when you're ready. We want to create a few of these orbs on the outside edge as well, but we want to do a dual-sided pattern here. We move on to the final stage of Quipple, and that's adding believe it or not, more orbs, but we want a few smaller orbs. Just little bundles of them, and you can go all the way around again, or you can just pile them up in certain areas. But we just want even smaller orbs as we move outward away from that center line. And this certainly does take a moment, but just get along with the process. Don't try to fight what is. It's not tedious unless you make it tedious. Just enjoy it. As I said, you can group them into little bundles here and there. You can go all the way around with smaller shapes. Whatever strikes you as interesting with your drawing, that's what you should do. Drawn this, and it just sort of happened this way. It wasn't intentional as I sought it out, but my idea was that these little guys, there's not any on the top because they're all sort of crumbling or moving down the sides and down toward the bottom. Gravity is kicking in, or their little nanobot minds are kicking in, or whatever it is, and it's just making these things. And we've got some of them here even tumbling down. I just like having kind of fun with things like that as well. Again, it's a way to add some visual interest to your drawing without having to reinvent the wheel. Just do something unexpected with it. Let's take a look at our next tangle. Dex is normally drawn with a grid. So let me just grab my Post-it and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So normally we draw a grid. I'm just doing this very sloppy to show you. And on that grid, we then create a consistent pattern. So Dex is going to be drawn, and I'll show you how to do it, with some squares within squares and lines that go out, and it's just a repetitive pattern. And it will create a really neat effect when we do this. Okay? Creates what they call a meta pattern. A pattern, we have all these individual patterns, but once they're all together and shaded, it creates a different meta pattern. And we're even going to put some lines in it on one side and on the bottom, and that will create for us a certain shape. And I'll break this down a little more carefully for you in a moment. But there's another thing we could do. We could also use a grid that has some subtle variances to it, but it's still a grid that we can draw in. So if I do the same basic kind of shape like I just showed you there, or not shape, the same pattern, and I'm doing this very, very sloppy. I'll show you a more controlled way to do it here in just a moment. But this just helps you to see what we could do with it. And now this shape is the same, or this pattern, but because we're doing it on a grid that has a slightly different shape to it, the effect could be even different still. As opposed to something that's more square, this would look maybe like it's funneling down and so on. You could do a perfectly square pattern inside of here, or you could do something oblong and strange like we showed a moment ago. But what I might do, since I've got my pattern falling downward, I think I'm gonna flip it upside down for a moment and draw it this way. I'm gonna draw my pattern, or my grid, going like this. Now I want to draw it with enough space within this grid to actually be drawn upon. So I don't want to get too strange with my pattern here. But like that, and now I'm going to draw it across this way, like that. So now all we have to do, easier said than done, right, is we're going to aura inside each line. I'm going to zoom in for this. So each square that you have, just treat it on its own for a moment. We're going to aura the inside line. So you're going to follow that same curvature of that square that you're drawing within. And we're just going to aura that to create a square roughly in the center, or it might not be a square. Maybe it's going to be sort of like a rectangle. But we want to create this shape in each of our little squares, that inner square, roughly in the center and about the same distance from each line. Now here's one that's going to get really small. Okay, and don't worry, we're making our own version of Dex. If I didn't say the name of it, that is the name of this tangle. It's called Dex that I'm starting with. I'm doing my own thing with it, placing it on an unusual grid instead of a perfect square grid like it normally might have. But I'm just letting each line and each square take its own cue, or take its cue from itself, I should say. And you'll have to use your judgment as far as how you fill in an area where you're not able to see. But hopefully you can already see one thing, and that is that our shape, our second shape, is completely different than our first shape. Now what we want to do is ink in all those middle squares. Wherever we see a corner, we want to connect the inner box with the other lines that is there. So going to the corner of each line and also to the corner of each box. As best you can see, of course, when they go off the grid there. Just like this. Connecting it with a little X. We do that to all of these pieces. Now we need to draw some lines. So you decide which way you want to be up, as I've done here, and we're going to create on these little beveled edges that we made, we're going to create some additional lines. I would say maybe try to get 2 lines in there at least, just like that, and then also on the bottom. So we're giving sort of a built-in shadow to one side and the bottom of this shape that we've created. As you can see here, I'm doing all one direction first so I can rotate my tile. I'm putting 3 lines in some of these and just 2 or maybe even 1 in others. Just depends how much space you have available for your drawing. And now I'm going to rotate the tile And I'm going to do those bottom ones of each piece as well. So in my case, I chose the right hand and the bottom, the right side and the bottom of each set of beveled edges. I'm going to shade around the inside of this pile of orbs we made so that it will help with the impression. In fact, I'm going to use a little darker pencil. I'm going to help with making the sense of depth that this stuff is behind or underneath all those orbs. Now the drawing itself helps with that, but by adding some shading and shadow, that's going to make a big difference. Let's also do some shading in the orbs themselves. So what I'm going to do here is just around the primary orbs that we drew, I'm going to add a little layer of graphite, maybe not as dark as that I had inside there, but just something that I can use to blend a shade outward. It'll bring a little more attention to those white larger orbs, and it will help these other things to fade a little bit, like maybe they're going down a slope or something. I think it'll help make a more dimensional look overall with these orbs at the highest point, and then everything else is going lower on the page. Alright, I'm going to turn out this light so you can see the graphite a little bit better. And you see that dimensional look that that has. Now, depending on what your thought is of your own drawing about these orbs, are they sort of flat discs? Are they rounded little balls that have like a cue ball or a pool ball? If so, you could add a little touch of graphite to each of these to give them a sense of shape and roundness. So now we've got this very unusual combination of tangles, round and straight, curved and hard edges, and it makes it interesting. If you're like me, your eye wants to track around this thing and wonder if they could fall down in those holes in the background, or what exactly is this? Well, it's nothing. It's not representational, but it's a piece of pattern art that we've made with some contrasting tangles. I hope that you've enjoyed the process today, and as always, I look forward to seeing everyone again very soon back here in the Tangles and Tunes channel. Until then, take care and have a great day. Bye-bye now.